weren't ready for all that sort of time changes. You know, you had Gary, you mean, on guitar, and Noel Bridgman, the most subtle drummer in Ireland, and the Brush on the bass, and Philip out front. They were huge. They used to pack places out.
Philip would end up standing at the side of the stage for half the gig because they were very progressive rock and they used to do 7-minute songs and 10-minute drum solos. So Philip didn't get much of a chance to sing.
Phil's involvement with Skid Row was short-lived.
He was having trouble singing. It wasn't that he was in the wrong key, he was in the right key, but he wasn't singing properly. He was having trouble breathing, really. And I looked down his throat and he said, there's something down there, and I looked down and he had a tonsil as big as a golf ball. I've never seen anything like it. It was like that. So I said, you'll have to get that sorted out. So he rang Phyllis over in Manchester, and Phyllis said she would bring him over.
I had to have him flown over to Manchester to have his tonsils out. Meanwhile, there was these 3 beautiful girls, triplets, long blonde hair, stunning looking. And I said to them, come on around, you've got to come and visit my son in hospital with me, and we'll play a joke on him. And we got round and I said to the matron, put nurses' uniforms on, the 3 of them. And when I go in and sit talking to Philip, send them in one at a time. So I go in and I'm sitting there, how are you? And he's going, I can hardly talk because he's had his tonsils out, you see. The door opened and in walked Cindy. And she was stunning. And she said, open your mouth. And she stuck it in. And he went, bit of nice stuff there. His eyeballs was telling me, ooh, she's nice, isn't she, right? The door opens again, and in walks the second triplet, and they're identical. He thought he was seeing double. And in walked the third one. And then he went, oh, Jesus, Ma, what have they given me? He thought he was seeing treble. But Cindy had walked up to him and she was pretending she had to pull back the clothes. She had a measuring tape. She said she was coming to measure his well out.
Peter Brand pumped his hair and sand for the police. Policemen came to Peter's name. God may rest in peace.
Ultimately, Brush decided to let Phil go.
Brushill sacked him. He said that he wasn't a good singer.
That was the worst night we had, you know, of all the nights. We were just over here coming out of the Zodiac, called him outside and said, Phil, had to let you go. You know, he didn't believe me, he thought I was joking. You know, and just out there, man. That's where it was. Never looked back after it.
Back in Manchester, Philomena and partner Dennis Keeley had opened a hotel, the Clifton Grange, which catered for a showbiz clientele.
It was like the hangout, you know, for people who worked late, mostly from casinos and clubs and me. And it was the old-fashioned shebeen. And she had her sentinel upstairs, leaning out the window, making sure that, you know, the right people get in. And it was just a wonderful hangout. And Phil would come in once in a while.
But he used to come over and he'd be fascinated with the hotel and he'd say, Jesus, man, who have you got famous now staying in the hotel?
He'd sit in the hotel sometimes when he was there and there was a narrow passage here and he'd stretch his legs out. So you'd have to keep stepping across and keep stepping across back. He could try and irritate you sometimes that way.
It was one of those places where as long as you signed in, you could stay all night drinking. I remember me and a friend, we both got absolutely, completely K-lied talking to George Best. And I mean, I passed out. Apparently I was put to bed by a stripper. But the next day he rang me up and said, you know we're managing George Best? I said, no. He said, yeah. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, apparently he agreed for us to manage him last night. I said, you wouldn't believe it. And of course that was just all of us being drunk.
It was like a madhouse, literally a madhouse. Philip wrote a song about it on his first album called Clifton Grange Hotel.
We came down for breakfast, and I was sitting around the big table with transvestites and all these people that used to stay there, and, showbiz people, right? Really weird. And I'd never seen this before. I was like, whoa, what's the current? And Philomena cooked this huge big breakfast. Eat that. And I'm like, I'm not hungry. Eat it. All right. And the kitchen's right there. She goes, you go up and wash your hair now, Robbo. I went, no, I'm just gonna go do the gig and that's it. I said, you're not going on television like that, without your hair washed. You show me up. And she grabbed me by the hair, dragged me into the kitchen, stuck my head under the tap, put fairy liquid all over it, wetted it, and did it into a foam, and then said, right, now rinse it out. And I did. And it all went fart. In the 70s, that was all right. It was like a perm or something, but oh no, she wouldn't have us going on. She wouldn't let me go on like that.
Won't you please come home? You've been away too long. We need you home. We need you near. Come back while one, will you? How can we live without your love?
Phil's career was progressing in a new direction. He was learning to play bass. Ironically, it was Bruce Shields who was giving him lessons.
When I was teaching him how to play the bass, I thought, this is grand now. At least he'd be out there doing something and enjoying himself and having a bit of crack. He won't feel too bad. Never occurred to me that he'd be going past me at some stage. So he came over every day from his house on the 22 bus. Came straight to my house. He got off, he walked across. Came in the door, blessed himself in the holy waterfront, which my mother thought was only beautiful. He came over every day for 6 weeks, and then for 6 months after that, periodically. And at the end of 6 weeks, like, he was ready to take on the world, you know.
Now Phil formed his own band. He called it Orphanage.
The Orphanage was a bit like, it was like a band of gypsies, because, you know, there was all these moving members. So tonight the band could be 4 people, the next night it could be 5 people. It could start as a 5-piece, it could end as a 7-piece or a 9-piece. It was an experimental thing until Eric put the screws on them.
I went down to the Bailey bar one night and met this other guy called Eric Rickson, who was the original keyboard player with them. So we ended up going to this club, and then he said, did you ever try LSD? And I said, no. And he said, do you want to try some? And I said, yeah. So he gave me a little thing. Around that time, the band came on. Turned out it was Orphanage, and it was Phil Lynott. He was singing, lead singer, but he didn't play any instrument. And he looked really cool guy, and amazing shapes, and great singer, and so on. At this point, the acid started kicking in, you know. I just said, who is this guy? I want him for my band. I thought the acid trip was over. So I sort of felt pretty normal, and I walked over to the changing room, and I knocked the door. I heard this voice saying, come in. And I walked in, and it was Philip and Bran sitting there, and they're sort of looking at me, you know, and all of a sudden the acid started kicking in again, and I went, and I just started walking around the room, giggling at everything. And I said, are you okay? I said, well, it's my first trip on acid. And they went, what? What? What's it like? And I tried to explain it was impossible. So anyway, the acid sort of wore off, and I said, well, actually, I'm looking for a bass player and drummer to start a band, to start a 3-piece group, like Hendrix or Cream or something. Do you know anyone? Phil turned around to Bran and said, listen, Bran, Orphanage has went as far as it can go. Do you fancy forming a group with Eric? And Bran said, no. And I said, oh, well, that's that. And then Phil insisted. He kept on saying to Bran, listen, you know, we've done this circuit loads of times, and there's nothing happening. Let's start a new band. And Bran gave up and says, all right, Phil, whatever you want to do.
So from a simple chance encounter, Thin Lizzy were born. It was 1970. The Thin Lizzy lineup was Phil on bass and vocals, Brian Downey on drums, and Eric Bell on lead guitar.
Philip just summed it up. He said, I want to be rich and famous.
It was in this bar This was called the Zodiac Bar. It was down here that he really felt he had the unit that could go the distance.
I keep thinking that Thin Lizzy was meant to be because of all the things that happened. I mean, why was I in that club that night, and why was Orphanage playing? There was one point when Thin Lizzy had just started. We'd been together about 6 weeks. Philip said, listen, Eric, if we're getting an electric group together, I think we should live together, like a commune. So I said, yeah, it sounds a good idea. He says, I'm going to go out in a few days and I'm going to dress up in a suit and a shirt and a tie and so on, and I'm going to try and get us a nice place to live. So about 3 or 4 days later, we arranged to meet in some cafe. And he came in and he was all dressed up in a suit and a shirt and a tie. And he sort of went, I've got them. And he had the keys to this place in Clontarf, which is a pretty upmarket place in Dublin. So we went out to see it, and it was a really nice place. It was at the top of this house in Castle Avenue. It was crazy. What happened was we got this reputation of having these all-night parties. And all these guys that come in, all these girls and things, you know, 20, 30 people there some nights. So, I mean, God love the people who live downstairs. You know?
The flat was cluttered mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually and financially. There was actually no room in it whatsoever to do anything. But it was full of guys who all thought they were going to do something. So consequently, they would put up with each other's idiosyncrasies.
I remember that hobble of a squabble.
The neighbours wanted them out, so they were going, like, it's ridiculous. They were coming in all hours of the day and night. You know, they look fairly wild with the long hair and looking like they've been doing all the things that the people next door wish they could be doing, but that's, what can you do? And don't forget, this is like 1969 or whatever, when people, that type of thing didn't happen in that particular area.
So this petition came round to try and get us out, signed by all the neighbours. But somehow we stayed, for a while anyway.
Thin Lizzy went from strength to strength, and in under 6 months were signed by the Parlophone label.
We walked into the studio and the guy said, yeah, can you bring your equipment and set it up in here? So we started bringing in the amps and the drums and the keyboards, and then at one point myself and Philip had one of these big long columns for the PA. And we brought it in and the guy said, oh, you won't need that. And we sort of went, oh yeah, you know, as if we knew. Of course we didn't. He says, you don't need to sing through that in here, you can sing through microphones. So we sort of looked at him a bit embarrassed and took it out in the van again.